All right, everyone, chalk up another correct prediction. Looking at Trump's approval polling, it had been holding around 44. It's about 43 now. Two new polls come in. Rasmussen shows it maybe down a point, Gallup a couple of points. This is what I expected to see. This doesn't change the metrics of my midterm predictions. It just, in my opinion, it actually improves the GOP's odds slightly. What I predicted in the immediate wake of the immigrant detention fallout was that Trump's approval would slump by a point or two, not by a lot. It obviously stay well above 40, 41. And then after a couple of weeks, maybe a month, it goes back up to its long-term mean. That's pretty close to 45. You got several more months before the midterms. It gets to 45, maybe 46 by then. My estimate has been consistently, if his approval is at 45% roughly, what that represents is Trump's core fan base, roughly a third of the voting population that would march to hell and back to vote for him. They will support any candidate he endorses. That's not a problem for the GOP to have them come out in large numbers, and I think they're getting more energized because of the immigration issue. Trump has managed to turn what could have been a disaster for the GOP, honestly, and almost was. They were on thin ice there for a couple of days. Thanks to Schumer, though, obstructing, the Republicans came out. They grabbed victory from the jaws of defeat, which is something the Republicans are not good at doing. The Republicans are really good at making major strategic errors. Like things will go along fairly well for a while. Then something terrible happens and it shoves their heads under. And then they slowly get out of it, and then it happens again. This is what the Republicans have been doing for the last decade. It's a problematic party. It was the sick man of politics till Trump came along. Now they don't have so many problems anymore. Now their main problem is obstructing their own party, a la John McCain, who looks like he's going to hold on long enough to keep a potentially disastrous Senate race from emerging during the midterms. And then at some point, probably in the next couple of years, he dies of cancer, in all honesty, which is, you know, whatever. But the Trump approval will rise. And it may rise much more quickly than a few weeks or a month from now because the Democrats have really screwed the pooch on immigration. Between Chuck Schumer, Maxine Waters, and the presence of groups like Antifa within the debate over immigration, and with new polling coming out looking absolutely dire for the Democrats on this issue, their Hail Mary failed. I'll be doing a separate video on that because it's important. But some people have asked me why 45. Again, that represents Trump's core fans paired with normal GOP partisans. They're not quite as on board the Trump thing, but they can be relied upon to vote at normal levels for Republicans. Because for them, it's not a referendum on Trump. It's within their own party. They're more like, oh, we got to grin and bear it until, you know, he's no longer the president, till maybe it's a President Mitt Romney again, something like that. Then you've also got within that number the center-right, people who are independent but lean towards the Republican Party. That's the only coalition that you need. You don't need any, I mean, the pure center is going to break even in this election. They're not going to be energized. If a person is totally undecided, 100% independent, there's a pretty slim chance they vote in the midterms. Their turnout's probably in the single digits, honestly. And you got to realize the Democratic coalition, this is beginning to change, but the Democratic coalition is younger than the Republican coalition. A millennial or a Gen Z is more likely to vote Democrat. Gen Z, by the way, being more conservative than the millennials doesn't mean they don't still skew towards the Democrats. But younger people don't turn out as much. They simply, especially in midterms, they tend not to vote. The voting block of a midterm election for some time now has been heavily slanted towards the right. That means the Democrats need to either be way out ahead in the generic ballot, which they're not. They're ahead by a couple of points. That's not enough to override the fact that the Republicans will have higher turnout, I predict. And they're not energized. They're simply, what would they be energized about? They were energizing around the generic concept of a blue wave. The thing is, though, they've been badly demoralized since then. They've lost 11 points of support in the generic. Trump's approval has gone up about 4 points since that period of time when it looked like there'd be a blue wave. Actually, I believe 5 points. There's no blue wave looming. It's more likely there will be a red wave and you'll get like 4 extra Republican senators and they'll be left with a slim majority in the House. It's not the best outcome, but it's certainly better than losing it. And they end up having an obstruction-proof majority within the Senate where the Republicans, and you gotta look, a lot of these are pro-Trump Republicans that are going to be, a lot of the non-incumbents that might take command and win their races, they're all Trumpites. They're populists. They're new wave Republicans. Meanwhile, the Democrats, they're having big trouble because the progressive candidates that could reform the party are simply too out there for a lot of regions of the country. Most of the competitive regions are Trump territory. So he's not having any problem within his approval. I speculate Trump's approval floor is about 35%. It won't fall below that. The Mueller probe has become an afterthought. Have you heard much about it in the last week? No, it's been a distraction of immigration. The Democrats threw up a Hail Mary. They really chose a bad issue to use for that. They expected that an anti-populist surge of support among the youth and far-left voters would buoy them up. Hasn't occurred. In fact, it did the opposite. What I see is that it's alienating the center-left and driving them to the Republicans. It doesn't mean they support Trump. It doesn't mean that they become a Republican or a conservative or anything. They're not going to vote for the Democrats, though. Look, let's say I'm a more populistic Democrat. I'm a blue dog, basically. Let's say that I'm one of those Rust Belt voters that defected to the Republicans. My inclination, based on taxes and jobs, is probably to stick with the Republicans right now. The Republican coalition is gobbling up possibly millions of working class voters already, plus over the next couple of years leading up for 2020. The Republicans are going to have a systematic advantage in parts of the Rust Belt. The Democrats have not found a candidate, as far as I can tell, who's going to be able to cobble together enough electoral votes anywhere else to go up against him. They might have to go with a Jimmy Carter Evangelo Democrat. Can you imagine? They might literally have to field Jimmy Carter 2.0 in order to have a platform of any sort. And I don't see any Jimmy Carters other than Jimmy Carter left in the Democratic Party, and he's more soft on Trump than any other living president is. Trump gets more flack from the Bushes, who are supposedly Republicans and so far right, well, at least by the standards 10 years ago. They're like, oh, he's evil far-right extremist. Jimmy Carter is willing to shake hands with Trump. Jimmy Carter, Bill Clinton hasn't been hanging out with him lately. I wonder why. I think they're at odds over the issue of the border. But no, his approval is remaining steady. The last couple of polls, it's around 43 or thereabouts. It probably doesn't fall much more, maybe to 42 or something, but it's going to come back. It'll come within a couple of weeks. You see in the polling, the Democrats might go into the midterms with a deficit on the generic ballot. Could you have thought 6 months ago when they were like 10 points, 13 points ahead? It probably looked insurmountable. But the Democrats have made a series of tactical blunders that leaves me wondering how anybody can possibly take Tom Perez's leadership in the DNC seriously. And think, they've begun outraising and outspending the Republicans multiple times over. I don't think that that's going to be the case in 2020. I think you're going to see another red wave in 2020. I think the Republicans hold the House. They take more command of the Senate, possibly an obstruction-proof majority. They get their wall, the funding done. More tax cuts, deregulation, the economy continues to roar back to life. They win 2020. I think you'll see more state houses in Republican hands than you do right now after 2016. I think that it's going to be a massive surge of support for populism. Then, after 2020, it cracks apart the neoliberal paradigm of the Democrats. They crash and burn. The Perez's and Clintons are gone. Somebody comes along and reforms it. Now, the proper reformation, if I had to give them a bit of advice, give the party over to the Jim Webbs and the Blue Dogs, sort of the Rust Belt crowd. People who don't want to massively tax the United States, and their issues that they campaign on aren't just wedge issues for the border states like a California or maybe a New York, which is basically, hey, you know, diversity and inclusion. And okay, that may work in a city. You've already got control of the cities. How are you going to how are you going to get the votes of Ma and Pa America? Especially when your coalition is hemorrhaging Latino voters. The Democratic Party has begun to hemorrhage its minority coalition. What does that leave you with? The far left, the activistic youth that won't even go, pull a lever to vote, and then people who are worried about, Trump might go after Social Security, so really, really old voters, some of them. That's not a good coalition to be left with. You don't even really have the progressives on board at this point. They're going over to the Greens and Libertarians or voting like for Trump candidates out of spite. You know that it's going on. You know that there are plenty of people who publicly, they're like, oh yeah, Trump is terrible, worst president. When they get into the voting booth, they're thinking about their wallet, or they're thinking, what are the Democrats offering me? They probably don't even go to the voting booth. It's going to become a big, big problem for you come 2020. As far as the midterms, you don't have enough time left to campaign. You're not even going to be allowed to campaign for some of those seats in August because you're not getting an August recess. 3-1 Democrat, I think it's 6 Democrats and only 1 Republican is adversely impacted within the Senate by that change. That's pretty bad. That's an entire month you've lost campaigning. You emerge on the other side, it's September. You got, September, and then you've got basically 2 months, and then it's the election. That's not enough time, especially if you are arguably behind now after the immigration crisis. The polling hasn't shown it yet. You will arguably be even or behind in the generic ballot. The Democrats have really screwed the pooch. I can't wait to further analyze this. That's about all. Peace out.